Hi, it's Tina and Tim, and this video is all about overtime and what it means to you when the court calculates child support. So take it away, Tim, about some of the comments we hear when we discuss overtime.
So you're in court and your last year's, tax information shows that you had, I don't know, 150,000 hours of overtime, something outrageous. And this year you just don't have it. For example, you finally got 50-50 custody. You've got your kids more often. You can't work all those extra hours because you've got to be a dad, right? Well, we often hear from the other side, I'm so tired of hearing the overtime argument. I'm so tired of hearing that they don't work that anymore. It was their income. They have the potential to earn that. No, Linda, they don't. They're taking care of their children. Right? She was dying over there, but we hear it all the time. They hate arguing overtime.
Only if it benefits them.
Exactly.
Only if the woman is making way more than the guy are they then like, she can't afford to live.
Oh, that's my favorite argument. You have to pay that high. We need to impute it. They can't afford to live. My argument's always this. You chose to have children. You should have figured out how to live before you had them.
Right.
Exactly. But yeah, so for purposes of calculating income, if you have overtime in your previous year, be prepared that they're going to argue that as your potential to earn. So if I made $120,000 last year, but 40% of that was overtime, this year my job's not offering it, or they've downsized, or I have my children and I'm not slated to make that 120. I'm only slated to make 80,000. Well, you have to make that argument and be prepared, right? Because the overtime's not there. If you allow the other side and you don't have a good attorney to argue it for you and they impute that income, it becomes an unjust order because you really can't survive because that money doesn't exist. It's an
Give me 1 second. All right.
take a minute and dispel something like Tina's talking about. This is what we're talking about right now is based off of the 50-50 idea. Remember this, people, and I can't stress it enough. Just because you win or are awarded, or maybe you two came to an agreement of this 50-50 complete, same number of overnights in the calendar year, that does not mean zero support. There is hardly ever, I'm not saying it doesn't occur, but there is hardly ever an instance where one party will not pay child support. So please understand that.
And the instance where it might be a zero order is when your incomes are so close. But right now, the current status of the law is if you make $1 more than the other side, you're the non-custodial parent. It sounds so rude, it's so obnoxious and offensive to call two people that share custody 50-50, one of them the non-custodial parent. That confuses people. So remember, non-custodial parent is the parent that makes more money.
For
even
purposes
in a
of support. Yep.
For purposes of support. So we're going to give a real life example of numbers. Okay. So when Tim and I were talking about when you were together, you had a lot of overtime. Okay. But you have a base rate that you're getting paid. You're either hourly or salary. Well, I guess you'd have to be hourly to get overtime. So in order for that argument to work, that you can't do that, first of all, you have to show what your schedule is, right? What hours of the day you work. You would need to have your employer come in and testify that overtime is voluntary. You should not be penalized for wanting to work more to pay for your expenses. You see what I mean? You're only obligated to work 40 hours a week. That's full time. If you choose to take voluntary overtime, you better argue it. And you better argue the reason I'm doing the overtime is so I can make all my expenses, my monthly expenditures, or I'm saving for a trip for my children and I need that extra money. Otherwise, they're going to say overtime, yeah, it's coming right in. Okay.
Exactly.
So, and they try to do that with law enforcement because law enforcement, the majority of the time it's mandatory. But even with them, look, towards retirement, they are requesting more overtime. So let's go back to now like the 50-50, and Tim touched on making an order unjust. So there's a 3-pronged test the court is supposed to do. The courts don't. Unless you remind them, they're obligated to make sure an order is not unconscionable. An unconscionable order means basically this scenario. We'll use this person, and this person is making $50,000. The one side is making 50. The other side is saying is making 100,000 a year. Well, when you do the calculation for child support, you then would need to take that person's adjusted gross income, that $50,000 person, subtract FICA, because and for people, if you don't understand why they subtract FICA because you don't get that back in a tax return. Exactly. FICA is Medicare, right? Medicaid contribution and your Social Security contribution. You don't get that in a refund. What you get in a refund is what you overpaid for income taxes. Okay. Just so we're all clear and on the same page. So say that person's making 50 grand, the other person's making 100. So the court says, well, guess what? Based on your combined adjusted gross income, he's obligated, or she or he is obligated to pay $25,000 to the other side. Okay. Well, now you're going to take that 25,000, add it to the 50,000. Now that person's at 75,000. Okay. Well, now you subtract the 25 from the person who's making 100. Well, they're at 75,000. You think, oh, okay, great. We just equalized their income. No, you didn't, because the person who is making $100,000 a year is in a higher tax bracket. And when you actually look at your net income, if you just have one, if you're only utilizing one on your W-2, somebody who makes $50,000 a year probably brings home around $700, $750 a week, okay, on average. A person making $100,000 a year is maybe bringing home, let's say, between $800 and $900 a month. The amount of net income isn't that much more. Okay, so you really should then subtract it. So you have the numbers. You're then going to argue, look, what we just did was transferring net income to her or him. And now they have more net disposable income at their home. Well, guess what? Now this guy over here can't afford to meet his monthly expenditures. Okay.
The other piece of that argument in Tina's scenario, right? Here's the key component when we're talking about the overtime. The $100,000 a year worker, that was based off of that voluntary overtime that they were able to take when they didn't have 50-50. So if that math applies and you take that $25,000 and move it over to the custodial parent for purposes of support, well, that 100,000 no longer exists. Let's say now he's making 75,000 because the overtime doesn't exist, and now you've removed 25,000 of that. That leaves him 50 grand. Well, now you've given the other side a windfall that they are now. There's a greater discrepancy. They're at 75. He's at 50. It's an unjust order.
Right. So let's do, like I said, I was going to do real numbers, but I made up numbers. So let's use this. This person makes $1,400 a week. Okay. Multiply that by 52. That's $72,800. Now that $1,400 is without overtime. So then we subtract FICA. That leaves this person with a new adjusted gross income of $67,230.80. Okay. The other side also has W-2 income. Well, they're at $55,000. You subtract off FICA. That leaves them with $50,792.50. Okay. And remember what I said about you're going to have to add both of those numbers to come up with the combined adjusted gross income. So now if I add both of those numbers together, that's $118,023.30. So let's use this as an example. They have 2 kids. So you multiply that by 25%. So that new number is $29,505.83. Now follow really closely. That number is what the Child Support Standards Act in New York says is necessary for you to raise 2 children. Okay. Well, because it's antiquated, there is no timeshare. You can't deduct for your timeshare because that's not how they calculated support, because this stupid calculation's been in effect for way too long and it hasn't caught up with the times. So again, remember I said pro rata. So based upon these 2 people not having overtime, just straight income, the $67,000 a year person is 56% responsible of that 29,000 number. Okay. The other side is responsible for 44%. Okay. Now remember, these 2 people share custody 50-50. And now just do simple math. Person's adjusted gross income is only, let's say, using even numbers, $17,000 more than the other side. All right. Well, if we do the math, 56% of 29,000 is $16,523.26. All right. 44% for now the other side, she would be obligated, or he would be obligated at $12,982.57. That splits up that $29,000 number, okay, based upon their income. Now, if it were Tina doing the math, and I knew they had 50-50, I would take the $16,523 and the $12,000, and I would say, okay, how much more would I need to give the other side so we both have the same net disposable income, right? That's just easy math. So I would take 12,000 minus 16, is 4,000. And remember, since you share custody, I would say, hey, pay her $2,000 for the year, and we're now on we have an even playing field when it comes to money. But the courts in New York State say, no, like Tim's shaking his head, no way. So you better know and go farther with explaining the numbers. So you have to see me in court. I'm like, blah, 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 and I can do it long form, here, without showing people names. Can you see it? I know how to do the math, just writing it down and scribble scrabble. So let's go back to the numbers. So now my argument with this set of numbers, I'm going to say, look, I'm going to add that 16,000 that the other side would have to pay because they make more money. That would now give this person $67,315.76 in their household. Well, remember, the dad in our scenario is making 67,000. So now you're going to take the $16,000 and subtract it from his adjusted gross income. Well, guess what? Now he's at 50,792.50. You just reverse the numbers exactly. So he is now she, and she is now him. Shib.
Yes, I mean, so what we're pointing out is no matter which way, because of the way the support standards are, it's always going to be unjust to one side.
Especially in this scenario.
Because there's no overtime.
No, but this is not overtime, Tim. Remember we said this is straight numbers. Straight numbers with two people just making regular, hourly W-2, whatever. We're just using the W-2, no overtime. You cannot take, if on a 50-50 and shift the income to the other person, that's void against public policy. That wasn't the intent. Now you're putting more money in that other person's household than the other person has. So what, we're now going to impoverish the other parent so they can't have the same things in both households. So that's why the courts have to do the analysis. They cannot do an income shift. That's what we're calling it, okay? That's why go that extra layer and present those numbers and say, wait a minute, we just took $16,000 out of that guy's household, gave it to the other side. Now he's making the same she was previously making. That's not just nor fair. So because it becomes an unjust order, like Tim was saying, or unconscionable. Those are like those key words you have to say, right, Tim? Something like that.
Yeah.
So you want to attack it that way, and you want to come up with something that's in the middle. Like the courts will never use my argument. Hey, why don't you just subtract the 12,000 minus the 16, and that's the number he's supposed to pay or she's supposed to pay. They say the offset rule is not used in New York State. It's inappropriate. And it's not supported by case law. Well, guess what? You better then argue the rest of the factors and say, well, guess what? I need to have the same type of living circumstances as the other side. So if she has or he has a single family house that has 2,000 square feet, I should be able to live in a 2,000 square foot residence. So my children enjoy the same or similar lifestyle in both households. So if you're robbing from one and giving it to the other, that wouldn't work. And you need to argue that. Well, guess what? I can't own that house. Why do my kids have to suffer and live in a shed when they're with me? But guess what? When they're the other side, they're living in a mansion. You need to argue that. What's another one? With this kind of scenario, argue the other stuff. Like Tim was saying, you can't work overtime anymore. So those are the non-monetary. Look, you have to transport your kids to soccer, hockey, blah, blah, blah. Or you're spending extra time with them because they enjoy, I don't know what's a hobby that's free, but there's plenty of stuff.
Or even the argument of this. You argued for that 50-50 time because you want to be a part of your children's lives. That court order puts you in such a level economically that it forces you to make the decision of either fostering the relationship with your child or having to work the overtime and then shifting them to a daycare, right? So by that order directly interferes with your ability to foster the relationship with your children. That's unconscionable. A court cannot do that.
Well, and I just thought of the non-monetary. What if now you're doing 50-50, and because one of you is, let's use I'm in law enforcement and I work one of those rotating shifts, or I'm a corrections officer and, my schedule moves, but I'm also, the nurse is on the other side. Well, maybe based on the 50-50, you don't need daycare anymore. And maybe you're the parent that's covering the daycare because you work overnights during the week when she has the kids or he has the kids, and you're watching them. That's a benefit because you're not paying for it anymore. So you need to argue that, hey, just because I'm providing daycare, I should be considered, because guess what? My kids are going to eat when they're at my house. They're using my electricity. So just you need to really sit down and think and look at those 10 factors, which will make another video and go into great depths of what you could use. But with this scenario, we're talking about the lower numbers. You cannot have an income, whatever, what did I call it? Income shift.
Yeah.
And use those keywords, income shift, blah, 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 over and over. Drive it home to the court, because geez Louise, do not leave there, because you're not going to be able to afford anything. And what we do, look, if you know you're going to get a 50-50, that's going to be an income hit to you. You're going to want to have a consultation with a lawyer or your accountant to figure out how that's going to impact you when you do have 50-50 and child support's coming, or you're going to argue the reverse. I should be paying less now that I have a 50-50. And here's one thing, the last thing that is new to arguing, gotta fix my hair here, is the fact that you're going to want to say, well, why do I have to work? Why do I have to work now that I have 50-50? Because you know what? I have Susie Q supporting me.
Exactly.
Or I have Bobby Blue supporting me. Why do I have to work? And if you don't work and you're deemed the non-custodial parent, you're held at the same level as if you were working. You need to argue that, because sometimes when men or women who have custody initially on a 50-50, well, they meet somebody, well, guess what? They don't have to work anymore. They arranged with their new significant other that they're going to stay home and watch the new kids. Well, is that fair that you have to work and pay that person so they sit at home? No, you definitely need to throw in there that there should be zero obligation for you to maintain that number because you share 50-50. Why should I work? Argue that. Really, at the end of the day, why do I got to work to support them? Because they don't need the money. Remember, they already have somebody supporting them. Not that we're saying the significant other should support the kids, but guess what? That person who's with them could get a job, but that was their choice for them to stay home. So you need to argue not to make money. And here's our office getting calls.
Well, on that note, remember, please, and there goes my phone ringing, to like and subscribe. If you have any questions about how this income shift works and how the math is done, leave it in the comments section. Ask your questions. We will get back to you, or you can call our office. Absolutely. Schedule a Bennett. I'll call and ask some questions of myself. We're always here to help. We love it.